We'd like to say a very big thanks to God for the privilege, and we'd like to say thank you to the Couples Fellowship for the opportunity to share our thoughts on this topic. We pray that as we discuss together, and we try to make it as interactive and as practical as we can, hoping that we also have time to ask questions and learn more from each other. We pray that the Lord will help us in appreciating what He has before us today. The theme for today is building a Christian dynasty. And I think the first thing we'd like to say is that God is the builder. The Bible says in the book of Psalm 127, from verse 1, that except the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain. And except the Lord watches over the city, they keep awake in vain, those who try to watch it. So everything we're going to say here rests and anchors on the fact that God is the ultimate builder of dynasties. But we are also not going to pretend that God will do everything. He has apportioned it in a partnership where there is what He does and there is what He has ceded to us to do. And what we will be sharing this morning falls within the realm of what are we expected to do as we partner with God in this journey of building a Christian dynasty. Christian in bold, underlined, Christian dynasty. And the Lord will help us in Jesus' name.
Amen. Okay, I'm going to kick off by defining dynasty. What is a dynasty? I have a few dictionary definitions here that I'm going to share. A dynasty is defined as a succession of rulers of the same line of descent. It could also be a powerful group or family that maintains its position for a considerable length of time. A family dynasty is a cohesive economic entity in which the perpetuation of family wealth and values lasts for 5 or more generations. And I'm just going to pick out the key words that stood out here. Family, number one. A family, a group of people sharing biological connections, shared values, shared objectives, and strong accountability. Those are very important words. Another key word in those definitions is succession. You can't have succession without success and without planning. It doesn't just happen. It could happen, but it doesn't just happen successfully to be what will be called a true succession. And perpetuation of family wealth is also very important here. This has to be intentional. Generations, it's about building a legacy. It can also be described as building a house, building a family, building a clan, building a name. That's one key thing with dynasties. There's a name, and it's known. And like I said, it's about building a legacy.
All right, thank you very much. A number of things continue to echo through those definitions of what a dynasty is all about. And one of those that I'd like to talk about is the perpetuation through generations. One of the definitions says that it is a dynasty to the extent that it lasts for 5 or more generations. And I'd like us to take note of that. So how do we recognize when we see dynasty? Maybe one way is to look at some examples of dynasties, and I'd like to just speak to 2. One example is, and there are several anyway, but I'm just picking these 2 for illustration. One of them is international, as it's not local. The other one is local. And at this point, I'm speaking to dynasty. I'm not speaking yet to Christian dynasty. Let me start with the local one. We have a dynasty that is in place today that we are witnessing. And it's what we will call the Dantata dynasty. Probably the most known in our time member of that dynasty is Aliko Dangote. But Aliko Dangote comes from a rich lineage of very successful businessmen. Aliko's mother is the daughter of an Alhaji Dantata, was a very successful man. Aliko's father, who is the husband of his mother, is business partner to Aliko's grandfather. Aliko's grandfather, from his mother's side, is the son of the then known wealthiest person in West Africa as at 1955, a man called Alhaji Dantata. And when you look at the next generation of Aliko today, you already see his daughters already entrenched. So it seems that there is a perpetuation down the line. So when we see Dynasty, one of the things we see is a very visible replication of certain identities down multiple generations and in very strong ways. The other one that I would like to speak to, which is not within our country, is the Ford family. And I had the privilege of not just looking at the Ford family. Today we know the Ford family. Actually, the person that stood out the most is Henry Ford, who started what we know today as the Ford automobile. In their family tree, Henry Ford occurs at the 5th generation, and after him, there are 4 generations. Okay, yeah, there are 4 generations after Henry Ford. So we see the Ford dynasty perpetuating itself, even though they are not the 100% owners of the Ford automobile that we know today. They hold controlling interests through a particular structuring of the shares. So this is Dynasty. We see one family, one lineage just continue to hold strong and continue to perpetuate along a particular line. In the case of the Dantata, what we see is business. In the case of Henry Ford, what we see is manufacturing and automobile success. But there is something that they started off with, and when you look at Dynasty, it's almost as if there is a DNA that gets perpetuated right from the top and coming down. And part of what we'll be talking about this morning is how do we develop and create that DNA that forms the basis of the propagation, and how do we faithfully transmit it going down the line. The subtopic of our theme today is looking at this issue of Christian dynasty from the point of view of spiritual growth, from the point of view of professional growth, from the point of view of legacy and long-term vision, and last but not the least, from the point of view of parenting. And as we do this, I'd like us to keep the pictures of some of these people that we have talked about at the back of our mind as we try to unpack what does it mean to have a Christian dynasty, and how can God help us to start the Christian dynasty. So there are 4 pillars that we believe are very central to this issue of Christian dynasty. And the first one of them is on the spiritual pillar. If we're going to build a Christian dynasty, it cannot be a Christian dynasty in the absence of the pillar of faith. And my wife is going to start off on this by teeing off on the conversation on the spiritual growth as one of the pillars that holds Christian dynasty.
In the definitions, we talked about values. Values are extremely important. And talking about spiritual growth and our spirituality and how the place it holds in building a dynasty, it directly links to the values we hold. As a Christian, as Christian parents, as Christian ambassadors for Christ, in every sphere of our existence, how do we bring God into it? And if we're building a dynasty, we've talked about leaving a legacy, we've talked about generations, how are we passing it on? It's not enough to say, I'm a Christian, I'm born again, I've accepted Jesus Christ into my life, but how are we living it, and how are we making sure that our children and our children's children can truly say, faith of my father, faith of my mother.
All right, thank you very much. For Christian Dynasty, the pillar of our spirituality, of our faith, is not what we try to bolt on after we've done everything else. It's actually the foundation on which everything starts. There have been many people who consciously or unconsciously have gone through this journey of building a dynasty, but they never lasted. And that's because the foundation was never right, ab initio. For dynasty to endure, it is dependent on the strength of the foundation that we build. And the first and most important foundation to build is the foundation of the faith. For us as Christians, is the foundation of Christ on which we start off from. I don't know how many of us are observant enough to take note of telecoms masts. I'm sure we've seen a lot of telecoms masts. There are broadly two types of telecoms masts that we see. There are some that are the slim type. It just starts up the width and the dimension at the base. It's also the width going up. But there are some that you actually see a much broader base, and it tapers at the very top. If you're observant and you take note, the one with the broader base are actually the ones that have the ability to go very high. And in terms of hoisting antennas, they are the ones that are loaded with many antennas. The reason why they are so able to carry the antennas has to do with the strength of their foundation. And in the context of what we're talking about today, our foundation not only talks about our faith in being saved, but it talks about our values and our principles. No dynasty can grow beyond the strength of the foundation of the values of the person at the top. When you look at the examples of Henry Ford, if we had had time to go through the biography, what you will see is a very hard-working person. In fact, Henry Ford that started came from a family of believers. So hard-working, industrious, kindness, I mean, those values were held there at the person who started at the top of the tree. Those values get perpetrated down the line. We looked at the examples of the Dantata family. They had their own values about taking risks, about getting into business, and they've perfected it over time. So in the context of building a Christian dynasty, it is not just the fact that I'm a member of a church. That dynasty will hold only to the extent of how deeply we are ingrained in our spirituality. If our dynasty will endure in terms of Christian dynasty, it must start with a strong foundation. And that strength of foundation always starts with the person at the top of the tree in starting the dynasty. One of the things, as my wife and I kept poring over this topic today, is the fact that for there to be a dynasty, there must be something that stands out. There must be something that is unique, that is peculiar to the person or to the line that is perpetrating the dynasty. We cannot speak of a Christian dynasty if we can't speak of a very strong and evident faith. Paul, in writing to Timothy, spoke to Timothy and said, Timothy, don't be timid. He said, fan into faith the gift of God that is in you, the type that was in your mother and your grandmother. And he mentioned their name. One is Lois. I can't remember the other one. So you look into the Eunice. So you see how the faith of Timothy is almost like what we call an inherited faith. But it's not inherited. It's the strong foundation that was started. So if we're thinking of building a Christian dynasty, we must be ready to do the hard work in laying the foundation of our core values along the line of the teachings of the Lord Jesus. So that's very important. It starts with the Christian faith. Please let's take note of that. So we go to the second one. The second pillar that we're going to look at as we talk about building a Christian dynasty. And this one is in the pillar of our professional journey.
Well, I'd say professional journey starts with education. And again, we still can't throw away the word values. So education, the first thing that comes to our mind is schools, institution. Education in the classroom, yes. Education at home. Education of what do we stand for. Education of why do we do what we do as a family. And the first example that comes to my mind is when our children were much younger, and it's time for Halloween. It was a struggle for them to understand why I wouldn't let them go trick-or-treating to beg for candy. And I had to ask them, is candy your problem? Like, okay, in our family, we do not celebrate Halloween. Why? I gave them reasons as a Christian from the Bible and even from a historical point of view. And, even though they heard me and they'll tell it to their friends, they'd say, my mom says we do not celebrate Halloween in our house. The next year, they'll still ask me, and I'm like, you know what, you're staying at home. You won't go to school on Halloween because that's a focus, and I don't want you to feel left out or have to feel like struggling. Then you can do all the preaching to your friends when you get back to school. Tell them what your mom says because that's what we do in our family, because that's what we believe, and that's what will lead us to where we go to. We can't also talk about profession without talking about hard work, like my husband has already mentioned, talking about hard work in the example of Henry Ford. Hard work, hard work, hard work. Our parents used to tell us everything can deceive you, but this can't deceive you, your hand, because it's what we use. It's a symbol of hard work.
Thank you very much. So we're talking about the professional pillar. There is no dynasty without an education. It's not about talent. People who are talented but didn't take time to develop themselves in terms of education and character never hold the dynasty. So it's very important. There's a dynasty that is in place in Nigeria today from the state that I come from. I'm from Osun State. It's the dynasty of the Adelekes. I don't know who their parents are. Now, so one of the things that tells you a dynasty is in place is when you see a pattern across siblings and descendants. But I believe the parents must have sown some hard work in raising them along certain foundations and pillars. The first executive governor of Osun State is the late Isiaka Adeleke, who also was a senator. And I remember then when he was campaigning, the backbone on which he did the campaign was the success of his elder brother. He's the least known of all of them, but he's the one that is the father to Davido. All of a sudden, we were just seeing Adeleke's vehicles all over Osun State. What happened is his senior brother owned a bank. And according to what we heard then, they just converted all the fleet of vehicles belonging to the bank. They rebranded them. It was very novel. The guy shocked everybody. He bombarded everywhere. To the point people were calling him Sherubawan because of the way he just showed up. He was building on the legacy of his senior brother. Today, his junior brother, who had also risen through the path of that same family dynasty, first became a senator and then became a governor. This man decided he would give the best of education to his son, David. And he sent David abroad. The boy had a different intention. All he wanted to do was music. And he abandoned his schooling and came back to Nigeria, tried to set up a studio. The father found out after he had come back that this is what this boy wanted to do. So whatever the father wanted him to do, whether it was to be educated as a doctor or whatever, the father just took his leg off the pedal. and said, okay, I will allow you to do this music, but on one condition, you'll be educated. And because of that, the father went to Babcock and donated to start up the Department of Music, equip the place, just so that the boy can have a formal education. Now, this is not a referendum on the moral character of Davido, but I'm speaking about the role that education is playing in holding dynasty. So if you're thinking about building a dynasty, you must be particular about the education bequeathed to your children, both in terms of the spiritual education at home, but also in terms of the professional education. It must be one where you are willing to pay any price that is reasonable, just to make sure that they are properly educated, because that is one of the pillars on which the dynasty will build on going forward. So it's very important. But then even as we then continue, and I'm not just speaking about the children, because the children are the next generation. It starts with us. It starts with the choices and the decisions we make to invest in ourselves, that whatever our calling is, we are the best in that field. You cannot build a dynasty by being an average person. You cannot build a dynasty by just coasting along. It is the legacy of what you have attained professionally that then becomes the basis of what propagates to the next generation. So it starts with us. What are the choices I'm making today? And dynasty doesn't have to be in a particular field like music. It can be anywhere. We've seen different people that have built dynasties just by striving to be the best in whatever they chose to do. You want to be an activist? Please be the best activist. Professional, morally right, known. And how do you know that people have actually attained dynasty? It's when just the mention of their name, not their full name, tells you who they are talking about. So today you're talking about a Funmilayo Ransome Kuti. She was an activist, but she devoted herself and committed herself to that activism. She was ready to go to any extent. She was ready to do anything just to continue to define activism. And check out our lineage. Our father was an activist. In their own time, he decided against what was popular, that his daughter would get educated. From that streak of independent-mindedness, standing for something, she bequeathed sons. We know who Fela is. If they say Fela, we know what he stood for. Olikoye till today is the best health minister that Nigeria has ever had. They had Beko. So you see certain things that are consistent. And then when you even go beneath them, go to the next generation, you see they continue to uphold it. So you just decide what is the lane of professional calling that you want to face. But invest in yourself to be the best there. And there is something that you are setting out by way of a journey that even your children and members of your family, because of how you have distinguished yourself there, start looking up to follow in that line. Before you know what's happening, they say, this is a family of ministers. Or they say, this is a family of politicians. We talk about the Kennedys. It just started with one of them. It distinguished himself in politics. Everybody in the family wanted to be in politics. And there are several. So what is the profession that you have set yourself to do? And how well are you investing in yourself to be the standard of measurement, to be the reference for excellence in that area? That is where the dynasty starts from. It is what you have become that we will now talk about later on in terms of handing it over to the next generation, and then we talk about transiting from one generation to another generation. Let me say this, that for us as believers, every believer has got a threefold responsibility. God was speaking about Abraham. He said, I'm not going to hide this thing from Abraham, knowing that Abraham will take care of himself and will watch over his son and his son's children. So there's a threefold responsibility. There's a threefold generational responsibility that we have. The first one starts with ourselves. It is what you have become that you can pass on to somebody else. So if you have been very sloppy, if you have always been making choices and decisions that is about today and not tomorrow, there will be nothing to be able to pass on by way of legacy for the next generation. So professional growth is very important. In your profession, do the best not to stop at what they have given you. Go the extra mile. There are people today who say, you know what, if they don't send me on a training, this is where I'm going to stay. They take positions with respect to things like training and development as if the organization or the business is being done a favor. No. It is you that is building your own brand. It is you that is building your own legacy. And you can walk out of an organization and they take everything from you. They take the badge, they take the laptop, they take the car. But what they can't take away is what you have built into yourself. And what truly becomes the legacy is not those badges. It's not the laptop. It is the capacity you have developed into yourself. So when we're talking about Christian dynasty, there is a lot that has to do in how we are applying ourselves in what we do. You are running a business. Can you, for God's sake, make sure that that business is the best run one? If it's a catering business, run it in such a way that if it is located in Ajegule, people are happy to leave VI in order to go to Ajegule just to have that meal experience. And I pray the Lord will help us in Jesus' name. So that we can cover the other two and leave time for interaction and questions, we'll go to the next one. And this one has to do more with the long-term vision and legacy. Thank you very much. I'm going to double down on the long-term vision, and I'm going to do that with a bit of a personal experience. So I came out from school and straight away into employment. I joined Shell. In fact, maybe I should start before the employment. I was in secondary school. My immediate senior brother, the brightest in my family as far as I'm concerned, extremely bright. He was studying mechanical engineering in the University of Ibadan. And I remember he came home one day and I overheard he and one of his friends, they were talking about oil companies. Now, I grew up in Ibadan. If you talk about oil company, I would think of Total filling station. I would think of National filling station. I would think of Texaco. So it was from him I came to understand that those ones are filling stations. They are not even the oil companies. And what hit me was when he spoke about they went for IT and the kind of food that they were serving them in IT. You know, at a young, impressionable age, those things started triggering off imaginations in my mind. And then he talked about Schlumberger, that people that work for Schlumberger right from school, they have $5,000 per month. I just could not believe that anything like that could happen. So from there, the seed was planted in my mind that I want to work in an oil company. So I then asked him one basic question. I said, people that work in oil company, to work there, what kind of education is required? So he said there are engineers, maybe because he was an engineer, but he talked about engineering. So that was the day I made up my mind. I'm going to study engineering. And I'm speaking about long-term vision, because without long-term vision, there can be no dynasty. So when I got into the university and I asked him again, I said, so what kind of grade? Because I got into 100 level and I came to understand that there are different grades. There is pass, there is third class, there is second class lower, second class upper, first class. He said, minimum second class upper. So I said, yes. Engineering, tick. Second class upper, we'll chase it. So I graduated by God's grace with a minimum of 2-1. So I met the academic requirements. From day one, I just started writing applications to all the oil companies. As God will have it, as I was finishing, I got employed by Shell, and I started work as a systems engineer. And I was meant to deploy video conference for Shell in Nigeria. The first time we were going to deploy it. So deployed it in the MD's office, deployed it in the conference room, in the boardroom. And that day, as I entered the boardroom, I don't know what came over me. I just walked straight to the seat where the MD used to sit. I sat there. I looked at a friend. I said, one day, I'm going to be sitting as MD. And then I got up and I left. I continued my work. As I continued my work, I started thinking about myself. I said, okay, you're an IT engineer working in an oil company. Do you realize that the best you can ever be is to become IT manager? How does becoming IT manager allow you to become the MD of an oil company? So I started borrowing myself sense. I said, that's not going to work. I have one of two options. After I thought through, I said, number one, either I change my skill from being an IT engineer and I go into the core of the business, because I profiled all the people who became MD. They were either geologists, petroleum engineer, all of them, but nobody IT, at least as at that time. I said, the other thing I can do is, if I love this IT work so much, let me just resign from this company, go to a telecoms company where my skill is in the core of that business and I can grow to any extent. Long-term vision. And I tried, I applied. I didn't get employed, so I worked hard on my option within the company. And as God will have it, I changed my skill pool from being an IT engineer. I became a petroleum economist. I went into commercial and then continued my journey. Whilst all that was going on, the Lord was speaking to me. He said, you need to broaden yourself. You need to train yourself. Where you are going to, you need more than the language of an engineer. You need some management language. You need some finance language. You need to go and learn it. And so my money, Naira, I decided to enroll myself and went in to do an MBA at Warwick Business School. Very expensive for me. But because I had my eyes trained on the long term of where I believe God was leading me to, I felt there was no expense in developing myself that was too much. And I finished the program. Barely a month when I finished the program was when I initiated the process, or when the process that took me outside of Shell took me out of Shell. And I remember then when I came to that decision that I was leaving Shell, it was because I got offered a position as an executive director in Oando Gas and Power to come on board. I checked what I got compared to the dream and the vision. They seemed to align. So it didn't take me too much struggle. As I kept praying about it, I made up my mind. Now, some people thought I was crazy, but what I had at the back of my mind was a long-term vision. And can I say this, that when you keep your eyes on the long-term vision in building dynasties, there are certain choices you will have to make. You must never make a choice about the short term. People who make choices about the short term will never build a dynasty. And what are the reasons, or what are the decisions about the short term? Oh, is that move going to give me more money? Okay, so I'm handing 1,000 naira here. That one will make me 1,500. And purely because it gives you more money, without thinking about how does it fit with that long-term vision? How does it help me in the direction of the long term that I'm going to? There are too many people who have taken a step out of building their own dynasty just because they made decisions on faulty reasons that have to do with the moment and not the longer term. Praise the name of the Lord. And so I took that decision, went in there. The hand of the Lord was upon me. I did very well. I continued to do very well. And then all of a sudden, I got to a junction that I needed to make another decision. This time, it's about family. I'd had the opportunity while I was working to restructure my work program such that I could travel, I could rotate in and out. By that time, the family was in Canada. I could rotate in and out, and I was doing that. But it got to a point I just felt this was too much. My family needs more of me. So I literally quit. And the top echelon of the company called me and said, what's happening? I said, I just want to be with my family. Do you have a job? I said, I don't have a job. Okay, we don't want to lose you. We're going to cross-post you to go and join them in Canada. But the primary driver for me, I did not even think they were going to cross-post me, but I was taking each decision in the light of my long-term vision. And then I was in Canada for about 1.5 years. There was economic downturn. The company decided they were going to shut down the offices there, and they asked me to come back. And I looked at it, I said, come back. At the phase and at the stage that these children are, I think they need me more. So I put in my letter of resignation. And I said, thank you. The Lord will work out something here. Praise the name of the Lord. Praise the name of the Lord. Let's keep the long term in view, because I felt at that time I needed to do a whole lot more work. Even though whilst they were there was a lot of parenting by the phone. I took the decision that my wife should be there. I was speaking with them about 3 times every day, walking through things. Each time that I went there, it's always a coaching moment to be training things. But I just felt, look, it's time to be there. And for one full year, there was no paid income. However, based on savings and reserves and what we had done, we got by. And when God was going to open the door for me to come back into paid employment, it was to a service company. Now, if you understand our industry, those who are on the operator side tend to feel a bit safer than those who are on the service side. As a service person, you are rendering service, you are a contractor, things are a lot very unstable. But at that point in time, my number one reason is this job is going to broaden me. It's going to take me to areas that I've never been before. It's going to allow me to develop capacity and competencies that I never had before. And the more of those capacities that I develop, the better for me for where I'm ultimately going to. So I took the job. I took the job as Group Chief Operating Officer. Within 1 month of getting there, they added Managing Director to me. So I looked at myself. I said, yes, I'm now a Managing Director. Praise the name of the Lord. But I kept on working, kept on building new competencies, kept on building new capacities, kept on launching. And each time, I'm always checking that thing in the light of the long-term vision. And then an opportunity came for me to be in the role that I'm in right now, where I will say without a shadow of doubt, God prepared me to come to this point. The point where I am right now is where, by the special grace of God, I work hard to turn down speaking engagements. There are just too many seminars and conferences that they just want me to accept to be there because they feel I've developed a voice in the industry, you are credible being there, and I'm working so hard to be turning them down, and I do turn down quite a lot. But I remember as I was going through the recruitment process, as I studied the company, as I looked at all that the company was doing and what the company planned to do, when I finished the interview, I don't know where that boldness came from. I said, thank you for the interview. I've had a great time. I just want it to be on record that I believe I was born to do this job. That every choice and decision I've been taking in my career is as if I knew that this kind of role was somewhere in the future. And I'm going somewhere. We must always take our decisions in the now in the light of the long term. Now, by God's grace, I'm in that CEO position. Doesn't mean that I've finished my race. No. I have a much longer term that I'm going to. And I strongly believe as we stay connected to our long terms, we are building the timber for what will become the fuel for our own dynasties moving on into the next generations. If there is one thing I'm really passionate about in this conversation today, is that let's bet on the long term. And let's not give up on the frustrations and the pains in the short term. Let's not try to short-circuit the process and prioritize things that don't last for things that are of greater and wider implications to the dynasty that we are building, to the legacy that we are trying to create. And I pray the Lord will help us in Jesus' name. Now, it doesn't become dynasty if it's all about us. Is dynasty when it then starts the journey of propagation, succession, as it were. And so the last pillar we like to talk about is on parenting. How do we tee off? How do we leverage the mechanics of parenting? What do we need to do to ensure that the success does not die in one generation, but it gets propagated to the next generations? And that's the next point that I would like to speak to.
About the long-term vision, there's a boldness you need to get to where you're heading to. There's that boldness you need to keep you on track, to keep you bullying through your way, because there will definitely be curveballs that life will throw in. There'll be situations that you might get carried away, and also as human beings we forget. It's easy to forget where you're headed to if you don't constantly remind yourself and be bold about it. And that's where it leads us into parenting. In parenting, we're raising our children, we're instilling those values in them, we're helping them understand those things. Sometimes we mistake parenting with friendship and feel like, oh, I want my children to be my friend, I don't want them to hate me. Yes, we want them to love us, but sometimes we need to step in with tough love. Sometimes we need to take bold decisions. Sometimes we need to help them shake up and get up and not be lazy and sit back. Sometimes we make the mistake of saying, oh, I suffered, I don't want my children to suffer. So in that process, we forget to give them what we had in an attempt to give them what we did not have. It's very important that we're bold about it, that we're daring, and that we can define the lines so that the lines don't get blurry. Let's be black or white, not gray in between, because it makes a whole world of difference in the outcome of our parenting efforts, what we're imbibing in our children.
Thank you very much. If we excel and we become the best in what we do, and we don't deliberately and intentionally pass that on to our children, we have not done well. And they are not too young, wherever our children are at in their journey, to become deliberate about that. The same way we have gone through the pillar of spiritual formation, the same way we have gone through the pillar of professional journey, the same way we are taking the long-term view, is the same way we must start with our children. Right from when they are young, we must involve them. They are not too young to be involved in family devotion. They are not too young to be discipled. They are not too young to be discipled to be able to hold their own individual devotions. We must be very particular about it. Those foundations are what is important. I think it was about 2 weeks ago that my wife came back. I think she went to a bookstore and she bought Yoruba Bible. And she opened Yoruba Bible, and it was Psalm 91, right? And as she started reading it, I recited from the beginning to the very end. I felt good with myself. It brought back memories, but you see, those are not memories about me. Those are memories of what was done for me. Those are memories of the grounding that I was given. What are the memories that our own children would have that will set their feet in the right place to go? There are people today that the reason why their own dynasty crumbled is that the character, the Christian character that came to play when they carried the burden of the glory was too weak and they crumbled. As the Lord continues to launch us into increasing waves of glory and increasing waves of grace, we will be contending also with increasing levels of temptations and trials. If we have not taken time to build that character, starting with our children, it will get to a point where maybe their professional pillar takes them to that prominent place, but because the spiritual pillar is weak, is unable to hold it. What then happens? You've been successful, you get it to them, it just falls in their hands. I think it's very important that we are very deliberate about the grounding that we give to our children. And we are unapologetic about it. We are unapologetic in the sense of letting them know what we believe and why we believe it. We are deliberate to even things like savings, investments. You know, the things that we have learned, hard work, industry, we should not feel the world has gotten so modern now. There is a full complement of house help and technology that we don't still imbibe the discipline of hard work in our children. That we don't consciously tell them the principle of honesty and the principle of integrity. I recall when our children were young, going for school trips. The school will say, you need to make sure they are going away for 3 days, they must take $100. When they come back, they must give an account of how they spent that $100. And when we saw that they were getting the message, we started this concept of you must begin to save. Everything you give, you must begin to save. You must begin to tithe. You must begin to do this. You must begin to do that. And can I say this? The easiest phase of education for my children is the university. Their university is stressless for me. Because now we reaped some of the benefits of all the groundwork we did. So what we did is immediately they were of age where they could work. Each one of them had to work. In fact, from a particular age, there was no more pocket money. You make your pocket money. And when you make the pocket money, you don't even have the liberty to spend everything. So we agree how you are going to spend it. And it's like, that is my money. Yes, it's your money. I know it's your money, but you are not at liberty to spend the way you want to. So each of them, I have access to the account. I see the flow of money that comes in. I see the flow of money that goes out. From time to time, we sit down and have a conference. So this particular line, what is it for? This particular one, what is it for? And initially, they took it that, daddy is getting very... No, we're trying to deliberately pass across a discipline and a legacy. And we will sit down, we will have conversation. Do you understand when the Englishman says, make hay while the sun is shining? Do you understand what the English means when it says, save for the rainy day? We must take time to discuss this. Let's not make the assumption that because they see us, they understand it. We need to verbalize it. We need to tell them. We need them to understand. Why? Because we do not know when our time will be up. We do not know when our time will be up. And you don't want a break in that dynasty. You want them to be able to continue. Praise the name of the Lord. So we must be deliberate in passing it on. Our faith, what we believe. Our value system in terms of how we apply ourselves to the work that we do, to the business that we run. The simple and the fundamental instincts of generosity, of kindness, of service, of honesty, of integrity. They are not things that we should expect them to pick up. They are things they should hear from our mouth as much as they see it being lived in our lives. We must be deliberate and particular about it. Praise the name of the Lord. So this is where we're going to stop the formal conversation so that we can leave some time for questions and answers. We've tried to stay at the level of concept, principles, interspersed a bit with personal experiences, but maybe this is already provoking some thoughts, some questions, some further contributions. We'd like to stop at this point so we can go to that next phase. And it doesn't have to be a question. It can be a further contribution.
Okay, good one, sir. Okay. When you said the focus of having a short-term goal will not make someone to achieve that long-term goal, you made mention of financial issue. That sometimes when you are focusing on a kind of money that will come out or something, it will not enable you to achieve that long-term goal. So what are the other short-term goal that you feel that can distract someone from achieving that long-term goal? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. So I did not say that money will not allow you to achieve the long-term goal. I use that as an example. It's not every pay raise that is a good move. You need to ask yourself, beyond raising my pay, what else does this move add to me? And there are moments you might need to make some moves, even if it means you are going to take less. The second to the last job that I'm on right now, I actually took it at about 47% discount to the last pay that I had. But I was clear that it was a job experience that was going to enrich me. I was sure it was going to develop my capacity in other areas that I didn't have. And guess what? Thank God I did, because it was a strong point for the job that I'm doing right now. The experience I got there significantly covered some gaps that I had and made me appear complete. So it's left for us to keep saying, Lord, where is the long-term vision of where you are taking me to? And this move that I'm about to make now, this decision I'm about to take now, how does it connect me? How does it lead? There are times it's as clear as our brain and our logic can tell us. There are times we need to actually agonize in prayer for God to speak to us. Just prioritizing an additional increase alone will not be helpful. And some of it, God will speak to you in the place of prayer. When I was struggling about, should I go for this MBA or should I not? And cost was a big issue for me. And I was going through my quiet time. And I got to that place in the book of Proverbs that says, wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And with all you're getting, get understanding. Honor her, and she will exalt you. And then the next day, as I was having my quiet time again, I got to where Jesus was talking about this parable. And he said, the kingdom of God shall be likened to a man who found a field that had, is it one big precious stone? And he went to sell all he had in order to buy the field. It was then I made up my mind that if it means I will sell, I will deny myself in order to get this wisdom, this is the treasure, that is it. And so I didn't feel the pain a lot because I was taking a decision that was connecting to my long term. There is no very prescriptive formula that says everything that has to do with monetary increase is not right. There are moments when it is right. But please don't just because somebody says, here is money. You're already doing well in a place. There is already a track of progression for you. But just because somebody says, come and take 5,000 naira extra, you abort that process. You jump to somewhere where nobody knows you. 6 months down the line, they're not able to pay you salary anymore. So what do? Take decision on the basis of how does this add up to the long term. And that long term, can I say this? God is taking us to places of influence and impact. For every single one of us here, wherever we are at, we are still far away from the place that God is taking us to. God is taking us to places where, by reason of the influence, our witness for Christ is going to be stronger. That is not to say we should not be doing everything to witness now, but there is a place like Daniel was taken to, that the visibility to demonstrate and communicate his faith became the point of salvation for even the king. God is taking us there, and we must carefully nurture our path, resist short-term gains, and just let's not be sidetracked from the longer-term vision. And because we stay connected to the longer-term vision, it's also influencing the choices we are making now. It's influencing the decision we are making now. It's probably the reason why you are not a social animal. It's probably the reason why you are not at every party, but you are making conscious decisions because you are building to a long-term future. And that long-term future, God will spare our lives together in Jesus' name. But let's get there fully so that when we are rolling off into the hands of the next generation, everything works well. There is a framework that somebody spoke to some times ago. I don't know how factual it is. He said, the life, I mean, when you look at the Israelites as a race, they happen to be one of the most successful. And he said when a boy child is born into their family, they have a program for his life that spans 7 decades. That the first decade is what they call the decade of learning. They just take the child and put him in the care of a rabbi. And the rabbi is pumping things into his head, is pumping things to him. This is how we do this is how we do that. And then the next decade is the decade of searching. Based on the information that he has taken in the decade of learning, he begins to search out things for himself. He begins to find out what do we do in our family, what are we known for, and so on and so forth. And that decade then prepares him for the next decade, which is the decade of decision. Based on all the information he has, he's then making up his mind, okay, this is where I want to live. This is the kind of profession that I want to be in. This is the kind of person I want to marry. And then that launches him to the next decade, which is the decade of expansion. So if you decide that what you want to do is to be a cobbler, and your decade of decision, which is the 3rd decade, you have set up one store, you're expected to get to a point where you should now move from one store to expand it to multiple stores. And you keep tracking yourself. How am I performing in this journey? And then you move from that decade to the decade of, I think it's a decade of consolidation. And then the last decade is what they call the decade of handover, where you are now handing over to somebody else that you have been grooming to take it. So there must be intentionality around it. It must be deliberate. It's not going to be easy. It's going to mean you make certain choices, certain decisions, but be ready to make it. Because the glory of the future you are striving towards is built on the sweat and the sacrifice of the moment. Praise the name of the Lord. I think I saw Brother Falabi. Okay.
Me first.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I've been really challenged and encouraged by the things both of you have shared. And I have a comment and a question. So my question maybe is more to Stanike, is to the end that as a wife, personally, I've had to step down on certain goals, certain ambitions, step down on taking certain jobs because it would affect the home front. And sometimes I think to myself like, oh, this is where I would have been, or this is what I should be doing. And he sometimes hits me, should I say hurts me, and but I know it's for building a Christian dynasty towards a bigger goal, because it's much more than what I want. It's what, for me, I believe is much more about what is good for the overriding blessing and benefit of the family. So how do you handle such things when you have to like, oh, if I'd taken this trajectory, it would impact on this and this in the family, and so I have to step back. How do you handle those situations? Thank you. And maybe Brother Bitetu has something to say to that.
Okay. Thank you for the question, Sister Nika. It's a very practical question. It's a real question. And I have to say, I identify with what she said. It's definitely happened. And there have been stages that, yes, I felt hurt. I felt like, oh, this wasn't my plan. This wasn't where I want to be. This wasn't what I want to be doing at this stage of my life. But by God's grace, I won't pretend that it came easy. But by God's grace, I get to the point that I'm like, okay, this is my reality now. What's next? Let's get with it. And like Stanika said, it's the driving force is always, this is for the common good, for the family, for the dynasty we're building. We know the road is far. Where we're headed to is still a long distance before we get there. I always constantly remind myself that I can't sit wallowing in the now of what might look like unfulfilled dreams, because I know that fulfillment is going to be bigger. It may not be the way I dreamt it to be when I was 10 years old or when I was 20 years old, but I totally see how things are falling into place by God's grace.
Amen. We've had this as a conversation, and I would like to appreciate my wife and all women who have had to make sacrifices to step back on their own pursuit, just so that the home can go on. I've moved very often since we got married. Started off in Warri. From Warri, I went to Port Harcourt. From Port Harcourt to Aberdeen, came back to Port Harcourt. From Port Harcourt, I came to Lagos. From Lagos, I went to Calgary. From Calgary, I came back to Lagos. So you can imagine what this meant for my darling wife and with her career. She spent 7 official sessions studying architecture, did 5 years BTech, 2 years MTech, and I said 7 official years. If you had all the strike actions to it, I'm sure it's 9 years, thereabout. And she had to live with just hopping on the plane with me as I went. I remember when she was working before we got married in Lagos. We got to Warri. We couldn't get job in time. And just as she got one, I was off to Aberdeen. She followed me, and she couldn't practice there because the children were very young. They needed attention in her mind. We'll be paying more for nannies, for childcare, than even what she would earn. And can anybody take care of your children better than you would? No. So the overriding, joy of making sure you groom your own children made her to turn her eye off from that. We left Aberdeen, came back to Port Harcourt, and as we got to Port Harcourt, God being so great, she didn't even get the kind of job she wanted, because she wanted a job where she could close at 2 as an architect. And eventually, the one that tried and agreed with her, the firm, she will close at 2 so that she can pick the children and they can go home. And she was doing excellently well. For the first time in the history of that firm, the owner offered her partnership. And as they offered her partnership, my job in Lagos had not yet come. But God had shown me that I was coming to Lagos. And she got the partnership before I got the job in Lagos. And she followed me, aborted that dream, came with me to Lagos, took on a job that was lower. And there was a time we were having this conversation. I really felt the pain. And I could only appeal to her and to say, sweetheart, please, it's for the common good. I will make it good for you. Let's just continue this way. It's a sacrifice, but the sacrifice is going to be worth it. And just look at the longer-term vision. Today, we bless God for great children that he has given us, walking in God's counsel, walking in God's path, doing well academically and everything else. But this is the result of sacrifices that she made, largely. I continue to support her in ways that I could. But we must take decisions in the moment, in the light of where we are going. I'm blessed that the job that I was doing offered enough to take care of our collective needs. Maybe if it wasn't enough, maybe it's a totally different story we'll be talking about, but we must make our choices keeping our eyes on the longer term. Everything is not about money. Can I say this? Even the money we earn, how much of it do you spend on yourself? That you now allow the desire to make a little more to be the reason why you sacrifice the bigger objectives that add up in the future. If you get a pay raise today, it's not likely that what you spend on yourself is changing. You're not going to eat more. You're not going to sleep in 2 rooms. So the bulk of what you earn more today is actually going to meet the needs of others. So what price are you willing to pay for that extra thing to the detriment and the expense of your home? So that is our calling. That is my calling as well. And as I say this, I can perfectly identify with people that are skeptical, because we've also seen experiences of men who have been very unfaithful, who the wife had made the sacrifice, was with the home, and at some point, the man either strayed away, found another woman, and here is a woman, the wife, who had never worked, who had no skill to fall back on, and who is just left hanging. My prayer is that for those who are in that decision mode, God will help the men to be faithful, if it is the man that is the one pulling ahead and the woman making the sacrifice. For those who are yet to get married, I'm not sure there is anyone physically in here, but if you are watching, because this is couples fellowship, it's important to get the choice of who you marry right. Marry somebody that has a true heart for God, that you can build a home with, somebody of integrity, somebody that you can hang on to, so that you are not left hanging in the journey. I would just want to say maybe we should put our hands together for especially our wives and our mothers who are making unbelievable sacrifice. Unbelievable sacrifice. If you see anybody that is doing well as a man, it is because there is a strong woman at home who is holding things together, who is freeing up his mind to continue to be the best of who he is. And for that, we thank you, our dear wives, our dear sisters. God bless you richly in Jesus' name. Your labor is not in vain. Your reward is both here on earth and in heaven.
Can I? Okay. All right. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for the wonderful session and what we've learned so far. So to start with, I want to talk about the long-term vision. So one of the things that I read maybe a few years back or some years back is that what differentiates a leader or head is the level of information that he or she has. So meaning that if you are leading a team, your access to information makes you the difference between you and your people. So the same thing applies to the home. If you look at Genesis, what differentiates Adam from Eve is the direct access to God and those information that God gives him. So the big challenge here is when you have a long-term vision, what often happens is that it's not always easy to actually articulate and to be able to communicate, to cascade it down. Because we are talking about dynasty. You want to actually build a dynasty. So it's not always very easy. So now the first question, so the major question now is, what are the practical ways if you are heading a home or you are in a home? Of course, the mother and the father, they are both leaders. But of course, maybe as a man, how do you communicate and cascade those visions in such a way that your children or your home will be able to peek into the visions? Just the practical ways to do that. So that speaks to the second point, which is legacies. So now for the third one, which is parenting, I noticed that, in the course of this session, we've not talked about mentorship and all that. And I just want you to touch point, because when you have a long-term vision, you'll be in a situation whereby you even feel like, is this vision true? Is it real? Like, for example, maybe you have a vision, just like using your example, to become an MD. I know you must have found yourself in maybe the lowest part of your life, maybe doing things that they call it maybe grunt work or something that as trivial as maybe filing, and you can be in that situation. And the truth of the matter is, it may be very difficult to actually believe that vision, and you are, as human, we always feel that. So what are the practical ways, or what are the things, who are the people, how to choose your mentors? Or let me even put it this way, is it right to actually choose mentors for your vision, knowing fully well that even if you communicate your vision, it's not everybody that will catch into that thing, because that vision is actually for you. So is it right for you to choose mentors that can actually guide you all through that? And the second question to that, which will make it the third question, will be that, what are the criteria you need to look out for? Or what are the criteria you need to see to be able to choose the right mentors for your vision? Those are just my questions. Thank you.
Those are many questions that are loaded in one. So let me say this first and foremost, that vision, the long-term vision, most times We don't see the pathway between where we are at and those visions. But it's still important to know where's the direction. What am I driving towards? What's my spirit gravitating to? I don't know how many of us have traveled to landscapes where afar off, when you look, you see a mountain. All that you see is a mountain, but as you keep driving towards the mountain, you may discover that it's actually not one mountain you saw. There are actually one or two mountains before the big mountains. And you may even have seen two mountains. It's when you get closer that you have an appreciation that they're actually very wide apart. But from afar, they look like they are standing next to each other. As God establishes in our mind this sort of long-term vision, in the now and in the moment, our job is to continue to work harder at what we're doing. Some of us get too bothered about that long-term place that we create an inertia. Our job at the moment is whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it with everything you have. The way God has structured it is that as you continue to be the best where you are, it continues. That place is a training ground. It moves you to the next level. When Joseph had the dream and he had that long-term vision of everybody bowing down to him, that's all he had. But what's the pathway to getting there? That pathway, everything he went through was the pathway to going there. And he stayed for as long as he needed to until he had passed the exam for that stage before he moved on to the next one. There were lessons and trainings that he must imbibe in the house of Potiphar. And if he had stayed in the house of Potiphar, bemoaning himself and pitying himself, this is not what God showed me. This is not where God, what I saw is totally different from here. He would have missed the point. As I use my example, I remember when I was a systems engineer out there in the field. I remember when I would take boat rides in militant infested areas. I remember when there was a particular incident, myself and my driver, we were ambushed by a crowd. We were beaten up. They collected the vehicle from me. It was a good Samaritan that gave me the money that I used to take transport back to Warri. I didn't realize that those were part of my experience profile that was going to prepare me for where I was going. I remember when I would have sleepless nights. So the point I'm saying is this: do not disregard or underestimate even the present experience. Your job in the now is to be the best in what you are doing. Joseph was the best in prison. He did not allow the setting of the prison to dampen his morale. He excelled himself that quickly the head of the prison said there is something special about this guy. He didn't detect that while Joseph was bemoaning himself. So, whilst you are queuing and waiting for God's timing that takes you to the next phase where you can appreciate that long term better, kill what you are doing now. Be the best in what you are doing. Because there's a place of the current experience in the journey to that long-term future. And in terms of communicating it to our children, we must be ready to just explain things to them. Now, let me say this. Our children learn a whole lot more from what they see in us than what we tell them. They learn a whole lot. And I had a very funny experience. So we are a family of 5 children, 4 boys, and our sister was the last. My 2 senior brothers, my dad used to joke that he has 2 generations of children. So my 2 senior brothers are close in age. Then my twin brother and I and our sister, there's a gulf, a bit of a number of years, and then we are closer. So batch 1 and batch 2. So batch 1 had gone on to the university. And we're batch 2. And my mom, Idiaba, trained woman, God bless them in Idiaba. I don't know what they did to them. They turned them all out the same way. Very industrious woman. She made up her mind that we must all be cooking. So she set roster for us. So in a particular month, if I'm the one in charge of breakfast for the entire family, my brother is the one in charge of lunch, my sister is the one in charge of dinner. So we did that faithfully for either 1 or 2 months. But as boys, we keep telling ourselves, what are we doing in the kitchen? Our friends will be playing soccer. After we have gone back from school, we're in the kitchen. So we're dumping everything to my sister. She would step up. So my mom was taking notes. She then went to my dad to complain that the twins are not helping out in the kitchen. So I remember that day my dad summoned my brother and I. And they will sit down, the two of them will sit down, you stand up, and they will start lecture. The lecture can last 1.5 hours. In fact, we feared the lecture more than they came. They will start lecture. So they were lecturing us. And my dad said, you know, in the days that you are growing up, is that, you see, it's not only women that are in the kitchen, it's men and women, this and that. It went on and on. So when he finished, I'm not sure whether it was me or my twin brother, we said, Daddy, we have never seen you in the kitchen. No. He said, keep your mouth shut, get out of here. So we ran away. Now, what's the moral that I want to bring out? It's not so much what we say. Our children are watching us. So you are the father that wakes up in the morning, and the first thing you do is to grab the joystick of PlayStation. And you want to now be sermonizing them about being serious, being focused. Okay, you've missed the battle. You've missed it. So it starts, the teaching of the children starts with us modeling the right behavior. Modeling how it should be. That's more than half of the job. When you now verbalize the reasons why you do what you do, it helps them to connect it. It becomes more authentic. Just ask yourself, the way I'm going about it now, is this the way I want these children to go? If it's not, just adjust yourself. So I will say that in answer to one of the questions that you have raised. You've talked about mentorship. It's great for us to have mentors, and we do have mentors, whether we say it out or we don't say it out. Subconsciously, there are mentors in our lives. There are people we look at them, and they just invoke in us the image of somebody we look up to or somebody we would like to be. Maybe not ultimately, but at least at some point. And it's okay to approach them, whether you use the word mentor me or you use the word, can I just have some time with you, and ask questions. Just maximize the time that you have with them. Prepare 2-3 questions. Just ask, get their perspectives. You could even go to the point of saying, you know what, can I come and just stay with you in your office for one day? Just observing. Mentoring is very powerful, because as we look at people's lives and model, we leapfrog some of the errors that they have made. Even Paul said, follow Christ, follow me as I follow Christ. So there is mentorship. And mentorship or mentors are progressive. There are moments you will get to that some mentors you have, you either catch up with them, or you get to a point where they are not operating at a delta to where you are at. You need another set of mentors. Please, just keep aspiring. Just keep looking for people that challenge you, that represent where you want to go to, and understudy them. Some of them, it could be formalizing the relationship where you have specific times of meeting together and just discussing from anything to everything. It's for you to understand. And whether we realize it or not, each one of us is a mentor, because there are people we are ahead of. We must be ready to share what we have learned, what has worked and what did not work, so that as they are coming behind, they are not left behind. Now, for us, the first pillar we looked at is the spiritual formation pillar. And for me, this is where discipleship comes in. We cannot grow beyond the foundation of discipleship. And I say this not just because I happen to be in the discipleship ministry. To the glory of God, the equipping that I have today and that my wife have today that has helped us this far was based on the things that were instilled in us as we're learning to be like Christ. As a church today, we've got very rich curriculum that helps us to become more and more like Christ. Christ indwelling your life, follow the master, serve the master, experiencing God, master life. These are very great. We should leverage these ones to build the character. The character is so important. Paul speaking about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, he says, but we have this treasure in an earthen vessel, that the excellency may not be of us, but may be of God. See, if you carry that grace and you lose consciousness of the fact that what is we are housing it is this frail body that needs to be, tempered, that needs to be made strong so that it can carry the weight of the glory, we're going to make a mistake out of it. Discipleship is very key. I know there are 3 questions you asked. I've answered 2. The rest, the Holy Spirit will answer it for you. All right.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much. I think that's all. We've checked online, but no questions online. So can we please give a beautiful round of applause for... Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, ma.